I do want to make sure that before we go down this road, I clarify some things that were different in the Breonna Taylor case. Number one, the officers were considered to have botched what took place on that day because they fired blindly into a home, meaning that they initiated some sort of deadly force, and the only information that they had was allegedly that this was the place of some sort of drug activity. At that point in time, you ended up having her boyfriend who returned fire, believing that someone was breaking in. It is very different when you are returning fire versus initiating fire, and there was no need to do so. It is a risk not only to the people in the homes, especially in a state like Texas, where everyone is allowed to have a gun, but it's also a huge risk to law enforcement. So being able to do this effectively, this is dangerous work that law enforcement engage in every single day. And I do want to be clear that I am always sorry for the loss of life. I don't care about the race. I don't care about any of those things. And honestly, I believe in the criminal justice system. I believe that if someone is accused of something, they should have their day in court. So I do want to say that I take issue with anyone losing their life, period, even if it's somebody that's accused of a crime. And I believe that they should go through due process and have an opportunity.
Texas Representative Jasmine Crockett stays busy. This time, she had to set the facts straight about Breonna Taylor's death at the hands of the Louisville Police Department after MAGA Representative Dan Bishop had the gall to say this just moments prior.
The ranking member invoked the Breonna Taylor episode, and I've just been sitting here reviewing it. Mr. Goldman said earlier on, well, this wasn't a no-knock warrant. Okay, what's the difference in the situation if they knock and they blow in, in 20 seconds, or it's a no-knock? In fact, in the Breonna Taylor case, that wasn't a no-knock warrant. They said they knocked and waited 45 seconds, and they went in. I don't understand the difference. I don't understand my colleague's reaction that
if you would yield, I could share the difference with you.
You've talked for a long time. I'm going to talk during my time.
Okay. Then I would tell you.
Maybe you can provide context for your egregious double standard.
This supposed egregious double standard concerns the death of Brian Malinowski, who was shot by ATF agents who accused Malinowski of firing back while the department was serving a search warrant. Malinowski was accused of firearms trafficking for illegally amassing firearms and selling said firearms without a license. The argument has been made that Malinowski's death at the hands of law enforcement was an avoidable tragedy. But equating and conflating it with Breonna Taylor's case, well, that's beyond the pale.
The reason they entered this residence and jeopardized this entire family, including Ms. Malinowski, who has no allegations against her, and shot this man dead is because he didn't have the proper license for the business they say he was engaged in. And it's even disputed about whether he was engaged in that business.
Correct.
And in that case, Ms. Breonna Taylor's boyfriend was without any contradiction engaging in illicit drug activity and receiving and deal. He was a drug dealer, and he was carrying it on in her place of residence. I can't account for the gross disparity, except that Americans hear a lot, and I hear a lot back about concern about a double standard of justice. Is there a double standard of justice here, Mr. Cummins, in those two episodes?
There appears to be, and that causes a loss of trust in government and in these agencies.
With that context and Dan Bishop's opinion clear, let's pick up where Jasmine Crockett left off.
But in this particular set of circumstances, we know that if somebody shoots at me, in fact, some would argue that last week I had a colleague that decided she wanted to shoot at me, I'm going to shoot back. And that's what happened here. But what's more frustrating for me in this hearing, and what seems to be a pattern, is that we continue to attempt to litigate pending cases. I do want to afford an opportunity for those that will be granted access to discovery, video, whatever video doesn't exist, as well as any statements, depositions, all those things. Some folk that have access to all the information, and ultimately, if this needs to go to court, having a jury that will make a decision based upon the facts and the evidence. 97%, a bipartisan group of gun owners and non-gun owners, which conducts research on gun safety policies, found that with regard to common sense gun policies, 86% of gun owners, well over the simple majority, support keeping guns out of the hands of violent criminals. 70% of gun owners said they wish we would enact some kind of gun reform. 66% of gun owners, for instance, think guns should be restricted on school grounds, and 67% think that they should be restricted in government buildings. And I will tell you that I fall into those categories because I am a licensed gun owner. Yet despite the majority of Americans and the majority of gun owners, Republicans last week passed a bill out of the House that eliminates states' ability to regulate firearms on private property, government buildings, playgrounds, and gun-free school zones. If that's not hypocrisy, I honestly don't know what it is, and it doesn't end there. As a party self-proclaiming itself as law enforcement's biggest advocate and supporter, Republicans on this very committee have introduced legislation to abolish the law enforcement agency entirely. Ms. Sampson, I have a few yes or no questions. I may only get to one. Yes or no, are you familiar with the role of ATF?
Yes.
And to your understanding, the ATF is in fact law enforcement, correct?
Yes.
Does ATF's duties include preventing incidents, investigating cases, and recommending prosecution for issues of violent crimes and weapons for gangs and career criminals?
Yes.
Narcotic traffickers?
Yes.
Domestic and international arms traffickers?
Yes.
Armed human traffickers?
Yes.
Terrorists?
Yes.
And with that, I will yield.
Yeah. Brian Malinowski was none of those.
Crockett's argument is sound, and she backs it up with data points that show increasing firearm regulations are popular even amongst gun owners. Her reasoning boils down to this: wait until we have more facts, sure. But operating on the facts that we do have, more gun regulation would have decreased the likelihood of this happening.
This is exactly what the left wants. Democrats and Joe Biden have been trying to take guns away from Americans for years. If they can't take the FFLs away, they are going to limit the number. If they can't take the guns away, they're going to limit the number of places where law-abiding Americans can go purchase their firearms.
The deeper conversation of policing in America should involve the culture of law enforcement. Both Taylor and Malinowski may be alive today if our system of policing didn't encourage and even incentivize systemic protocols that lead to loss of life. Law enforcement, as it relates to weaponizing the government against its people, is much different than what MAGA Republicans are talking about. They are blaming President Biden for changing firearm laws and empowering the ATF to revoke firearm licenses for certain violations. It's typical political maneuvering. The real blame should be placed on inept and rigid law enforcement agencies and the infrastructure that refuses to allow accountability. Pay attention to who refuses to change course, or even more, who will protect these institutions at all cost, even the cost of life.